Welcome and thank you for joining us. You're listening to the Beyond 50 radio program. I'm Daniel Davis. On the program today, we're going to be speaking with a chiropractor who specializes in chronic, metabolic, and functional neurology care in his chiropractic practice since 1988 in Salem, Oregon. He also continues postgraduate studies pursuing advanced degrees in functional neurology and clinical nutrition. He's also written 3 books about practical healthcare and 1 thriller about agricultural genetical engineering that will be made into a feature film. He also writes monthly for health newsletters and blog posts. And today we're going to be talking about the specific topic that seems to be really growing on the horizon, and that is gluten sensitivity or intolerance. I'd like to welcome to the Beyond 50 radio program today our guest, Dr. Peter Lind. Dr. Lind, thank you for joining us here on the program.
Great, thanks for having me.
Now, let's talk about this gluten thing. I've been out to restaurants, over the last several years, and you seem to hear more and more people talking about or being concerned about gluten. What's going on here?
Well, gluten is in a simplistic form, it's a protein found in grains, and more specifically in wheat and barley and rye. This has existed for hundreds and even thousands of years, but it's only been recently, since the advent of processing, grain processing, and even genetically engineering, that the gluten has become a real problem in the human digestion process. What's happened is the body has been looking at this and sending off this as a foreign protein, something it's not really ever seen or been part of the digestive system as it would normally be, as other foods would normally be. So what happens is the body begins an immune system attack on the gluten molecule. And as people eat more grains and specifically gluten actually means glue. That's
okay.
Where the word comes from. And so it's a binder, and it makes foods taste good, and actually people begin to crave it after a while. But that becomes a real problem, and so the immune system begins to kick off its antibody reactions and begins to attack it. But while it's doing this, it sets up a whole inflammatory response, and it varies from very minor and maybe even not even noticeably up until many major digestive system problems. Ulcerative colitis and even Crohn's disease are at the far end of the spectrum. But what we're finding now and what we're learning is this really actually is a precipitating factor in other chronic degenerative diseases, and I can go into that as well. But that's kind of in a nutshell what's the beginnings problems of gluten, and so more and more people are really becoming sensitive, first of all, sensitive to it, and then as they become progressively worse and worse, they become intolerant to it, and then they know that they cannot consume gluten or anything that's related to gluten.
Mm-hmm. I know, it's just, you see so much more of it this day and age, and I was starting to wonder, are we just becoming more sensitive to our diet because of the way that our diet has been produced, for instance, in the United States over the last 30 years?
Well, absolutely. The things that we have, just look on the shelves today at your grocery stores. We didn't have those 50 years ago. You really, if you walk through the shelves, you see foods that are created that have never existed even, as recent as 50 years ago. And so what we've seen, really, we're really downplaying, we're really degrading our health by what we eat, and it's really picking up momentum now, and then more and more people are, of course, being susceptible to such things as gluten in their diet. But again, that's one major effect and force on the body. There's many others these days, but that's becoming just a huge problem to people's health.
Mm-hmm. Now, tell us what parts of the body really get affected the most by gluten.
Well, the primary one is the digestive system, and as the body begins to digest the protein, or attempts to, and so that's the beginning of it. And so right off the bat, it's the digestive system, which in turn leads to, it's a domino effect. It leads to the immune system, which is related to the nervous system. So those three really start the process. But what I'm finding, what we're finding is that you don't even need to have digestive problems or complaints or symptoms to have a gluten problem. You're kicking off the immune system, which may be a problem. So runny noses, sniffles, and chronic coughs, may be a problem that people may have related to gluten. But then you get the nervous system involvement. So some of the real specific ones are the thyroid gland. The molecules of the thyroid cells are very similar in shape to the gluten molecule. So as the body prepares and makes antibodies to the gluten molecule, over time, as the antibodies increase, it begins attacking the thyroid gland. And this has been just recently been known to happen. And so right away, you can test antibodies to thyroid, or you can get a gluten test, thyroglobulins, and find out how many antibodies are actually is affecting the thyroid gland. So thyroid glands, the immune system, nervous system, digestive system, those are just kind of at the top of the list, and then it goes on from there of other reactions in the body.
Fascinating stuff. It sounds like it really can tear somebody up pretty good then.
Yeah, well, and that's what we're seeing. More and more people with chronic problems. And here's what I do. I wrote a booklet, a manual on gluten a number of years ago, and I thought everybody really knew about this problem, but I'm finding more and more people are just becoming aware of it. And so what I do right off the bat with people clinically in my clinic is, let's just go off gluten for 2 weeks. Just you remove all the breads and the scones and the donuts and everything that tastes good. And when I first say that to people, I can see their reaction. Their face just drops. Like, what are you doing? What can I eat? I can't get by a day without these things. And so that's the first kind of a sign that they've got a gluten addiction. Another thing, let me just mention, what we're finding is that the gluten molecule can create an opioid-like reaction in the brain, which is the kind of the leading into addictions. And so people that are gluten sensitive, before they become really intolerant, become almost addicted to this. And you can see this with people. They can't live, they got to go a day. They can't live a day without eating something with wheat or gluten or grain, because it just tastes so good. But it actually stimulates the brain to want more. So we go back to the 2 weeks, go off gluten for 2 weeks, and invariably we see many changes in just a few days. And so by the end of 2 weeks, we see a lot of, and I didn't believe this when I first started it, but it's been repeated over and over, that memory improves, brain fog improves, even mental, emotional problems decrease. And so by the end of 2 weeks, people are feeling good. And then I say, okay, on the 15th day, that next day after you've done this gluten in your diet, then have all the gluten you want for the whole day. And that's kind of the nail on the coffin, is that they feel better and better and better by the end of 2 weeks. And then that next day, they feel horrible because they're reintroducing all the gluten, all the stimulation that the body has to react against again, and they get a lot of these symptoms back in just a day. It's really amazing. So that's what if you don't know that it may be a problem, then I just say that take a 2-week gluten fast and just get it out of your diet, and on the next day, to take it all back in and see what happens. And that's kind of the real believer. That makes the believer out of the person. But musculoskeletal pains, joint pains, and everything I mentioned will begin to decrease. And now we're seeing other experts really starting to talk about this. And one of the things that I'm going to talk about more and more is a book called Grain Brain, and it's by a Dr. David Perlmutter. He's a medical neurologist. This is a neurologist who does neurosurgery, but he's really shifted his focus into metabolism, and really the book is about how gluten specifically, but carbohydrates in general, really affect and actually destroy the nervous system. And so we're seeing more and more of this coming out in the popular press these days.
Mm. Now, let's talk about specifically what foods we should really keep our eyes on or avoid when it comes to gluten. Now, I do know, my understanding is soy one of them.
Soy?
Soy, yes.
Well, soy is a whole other animal.
Okay.
It doesn't have gluten. Let me just mention that soy doesn't have gluten in it, but it's one of the most highly genetically modified foods in the country. So by that fact, and what I mean genetically modified, I mean the body genetically modified means we take a DNA of that protein and we modify it. It's not found in nature, and so again, it's a foreign body. It's a foreign entity that our body has to. We've never seen it before, and so our body has to react to it. So that's the problem with soy. But gluten, specifically, is found in wheat products.
Wheat, okay.
Wheat mostly, but like I said, barley and rye, and there are other products. And so just by the fact of building those food sources, they have gluten in them. But gluten is added to many other sauces and other foods to make, like I said, glue. It binds things together, and so it's found in almost every baked product there is. Now, there are gluten-free products, but I would just really, if you could just take gluten out of your diet, which is very difficult for people, that would be the first thing. And then the next tier, I would say, is we're really trying to get people away from carbohydrates in general because of the blood sugar problems. That's the next problem. So it's just, I never believed, when I first heard about this maybe 7 or 8 years ago, another doctor told me, I thought, no, you're crazy. That doesn't make any sense. And how could this food that's been grown in the ground for hundreds of years have this problem? But it's really what we've done processing and genetically modifying foods and over the years that we've developed into these problems. So I would start with the foods that we know of wheat, and wheat, barley, and rye are the three primary ones that contain gluten.
So I suppose that if you're going to get your grain and if you're going to get your carbohydrates, then rice might be a better direction to go.
Well, you don't even need carbohydrates in your diet. The best source of fuel, now this is a whole other topic, though, and I don't want to steer off, but let me just say this. The best source of fuel is saturated fats. And I know this is very contradictory to people, but the more I study this, because it releases energy slowly over a long period of time. The problem with sugars, which are really carbohydrates, and that includes everything that causes an insulin response, meaning the body takes in carbohydrates or wheat or product like that. Our insulin levels spike really high and burn up the fuel, basically put it into our cells, and then it just drops. And so we get a spike of energy and then a drop. And that's what happens when people eat a highly processed meal. They're hungry an hour or two later. That's a bad source of fuel. You want something that you can eat and will sustain your energy for long periods of time. So that's kind of the guideline that we really work towards. And we measure this now with a glucometer, people taking blood sugars various times during the day, so we can know how their bodies are responding to carbohydrates in general.
Okay, so just avoid carbohydrates and certainly anything with wheat, barley, and rye.
Definitely gluten. Yes, I would. So how do you manage somebody? And people are overwhelmed anyway. And so I say, let's just start with the gluten. Just remove gluten from your diet, and you get them to thinking better, feeling better. Actually, more they can move better. They feel like they can move and even get around better. So I start with that. If you do too much, you overwhelm somebody, and then they get frustrated and don't want to do anything. They go back to their old ways again, and that's not very fun for anybody. So we start kind of a step-by-step process. So just do the 2-week gluten starvation. Just take yourself off of gluten, and invariably you're going to feel better. So you start with that, and then the next process is a longer one of working with just the general carbohydrate overload that somebody has. And I work with many people that have insulin reactivity or insulin resistance or even prediabetes or diabetes. And you start with gluten, and then you just kind of work your way down the line of other carbohydrates. And getting people to shift into better modes of eating so that they actually fuel their body, and so they can use their body instead of having this instant gratification of foods and maybe the spike of energy, and then the plummet of energy, and then the devastating problems that are related to diet. Really, really working on that issue with most people.
Now, it's pretty easy for the most part when you're at the supermarket to avoid gluten, isn't it?
Well, if that's on your consciousness.
Yeah, I suppose. But if you were going to avoid it and you're at the supermarket, you're shopping, what's the best way to do that?
Well, anything in a box, any kinds of cookie, anything that tastes good is going to have a gluten in it for the most part.
Right.
So you stay out of the cookie aisle, you stay out of the donut aisle, you stay out of the pastry aisle, you stay out of the bread aisle. You just start with that, but then, it's really, there are many, many words and phrases that are used, and I can't tell you all of them. I don't know them off the top of my head, but that are actually, they have gluten in it, like natural flavorings is a word that has gluten in it. Hydrolyzed protein is another name for gluten. So, it's unfortunate that our labeling industry has been so skewed that a word doesn't mean what it's supposed to mean. It means something else that we don't know what it means, and we think it's okay. So you get to read the labels, and it's the whole saying. If I don't understand what that word means, it's probably not good for me. And the more ingredients typically found in foods, kind of a real general rule that the worse it is for your body. So you stay off the sweet smelling foods and the ones that taste good, and then the next level is you really start reading the labels. And now restaurants and food manufacturers are making gluten-free food, and I think a lot of it's okay, but I think a lot of it people are just going, oh, now I can eat all this other gluten-free food. And again, they're getting into the carbohydrate overload. They're still having other problems because they're just downing this carbohydrate and having this whole process that I just talked about, the sugar insulin rush that they're damaging their tissues with.
Now, you were mentioning earlier in the program, Dr. Lind, about how this gluten sensitivity, things such as brain fog, maybe memory loss, whatever the case is. So it's obvious that this gluten sensitivity causes inflammation, which has an effect on the brain. You also mentioned the digestive system. Talk about how that, and especially our diet, has been affecting our children.
Well, I've heard, and this has been years ago, that the generation that's coming up is more unhealthy than their parents are, and this is the first time in the history that's been noted. I think the kids today, whether they're infants or adolescents, are starting off in life with more health problems than ever before. We shouldn't have these problems with kids, but again, it's coming down to many, many factors. But one of the primary ones is food, what they're eating. Kids, they may or may not eat breakfast, and if they do, I think it's common to have sugar cereal, which any kind of cereal is just not healthy food, and so they're ramped up a little bit, and then they're sluggish the rest of the day. So their poor brains just aren't getting good fuel, and then add on top of that the gluten involvement. So you see a lot of sensitivities, you see allergies, and just chronic sickness that really, really needs to be avoided, because these kids aren't having a good start in life, and it's going to get worse from there on out. They're going to develop more and more health problems as they age. So I really see a problem with these kids, and something really needs to be done. And we try to educate. Education is one of the best things, but it's really what it is that's being educated, I think, is more important now that I study these problems.
Okay. But this is a reversible condition, as you said earlier. You just simply get away from all this stuff.
Yes, that's the upside to all of this. You want to trade the instant gratification for feeling better and having a good life and a good quality of life. And so I think the earlier you do this, make changes, that the better off and more reversible it can be. You get somebody that's 60, 70, 80. I work with 80-year-olds, and they don't want to change their diet too much. But and again, it just depends on the quality of life that the person has led up to the point that they have to make the change. If it's pretty good, they're going to turn around pretty well. But if they've done the same things over and over, and it's been embedded into their system, it's very difficult to make reversible changes. But it is possible.
Well, as they say, habits, they take a while.
Right, yeah.
You get to a point you've done it so much you don't know if you can change, but boy, that nervous system feels rocked when you make the attempt, doesn't it?
Oh, yeah. Well, and we always do what we shouldn't do, and we don't do what we need to do, and that's kind of human nature.
Funny stuff. Now, I understand, as I was mentioning earlier in the program, that you're writing your fourth book, is it?
I've written probably 2 more books.
Okay.
I can't keep up. I've written one on first one was genetic engineering. The second and third one, I think, together were ones on really a good, concise workup on diet. And then the other one was a good workup on exercise. And then I wrote a pretty beefy stress book on stress management and what to do. I wrote edited one on the peripheral neuropathy. And I'm working on one now called the Wellness Mandate, kind of putting everything, what we're supposed to be doing. Everybody has their own opinion. I think you should do this and this. I'm putting everything that I've found. I've been in practice 25 years, and I've seen a lot of things, and I still get up at 5 o'clock and study biochemistry of all things, which is probably pretty exciting for most people. But I'm putting together right now where does all these things that we need to do fit in a model? And so that's what I'm working on now. Wellness Mandate is, if you just do these certain things, you can't help but improve your health. And diet is certainly one of them, but it's not the only thing. So I'm working on that. I do a lot of writing. It kind of keeps my sanity, I guess I would say.
Well, I was specifically interested in one that the producer had here about the one in genetic engineering. It's a thriller.
Right. That I just thought back. I started that in 2001. And I finished it in 2000. It came out in 2005. It was kind of a garage, low budget production of it. But it was just what. And I read an article journal about what's been happening. At that point, I mean, probably in 2000, what was going on in the genetically modified organizational, what was going on in that field, and I was just shocked. It was a half a paragraph, and I was just shocked, and I said, nobody knows this, and here it is all these years later, and still nobody, I mean, there are more people, but people don't really understand the problems, and it's agribusiness and conglomerates really manipulating food sources, and what they're doing, I mean, it's really neat biology if you're doing this in the lab, but I think it's really having devastations, and we don't hear about it much in the United States, but in Europe, the public doesn't stand for it. They protest, and a lot of these agribusinesses are pushed out. They don't let a lot of them do their foods. But here in the United States, it's just, I've heard farmers, I don't know if we want to get into that, but it's just I think it's really detrimental, and I don't think we've even come close to seeing the ramifications and the problems that will develop, because anything unnatural tends to come out as problematic years down the road, and we're seeing this if we just look around right now. We're just seeing a lot of this right now, and gluten is one of them, but it's the engineering. It's you taking one gene or a genetic code from one species and putting it in another code and forcing it to happen. And so, by that fact, it's not natural, and it will have inherent problems because it's not been ever developed that way.
Mm-hmm. Fascinating topic. You wouldn't think gluten would be an exciting thing to talk about, but you never know the roads it takes you down, and certainly a lot of us need to become aware of it, not just because this seems to be kind of one of those fads, like back in the 1980s when you had the no-carbohydrate diet going on, but this is the real deal because we're talking about a good portion of this gluten diet, if you will, comes from food that's produced, that has been modified, that has been tampered with and changed out of its natural state. You put that into your body and you expect a natural reaction, well, you might want to think about your expectations a little harder, I think.
But, I mean, what you just said it's everything we talked about is what you just said, because and a lot of people don't realize how much their diet affects their health and affects their energy, but what you just said, people just realize what they eat has a profound effect on them. You would hope they would change, and by the time they get symptoms and even disease processes, and then they realize, well, I've got to change. But if you started earlier on, I think we could avoid a lot of these problems. And then people go, I'm aching all over and I'm painful, and so take this drug. That's what we do in our society is we take drugs and we keep doing the same things, perpetuating a problem. And now we've got one drug, and then that doesn't work, and so you get on this drug roller coaster, and you add more drugs, and you're still not getting to the root cause of the problem. And that's what's been drastically missing in our healthcare. The World Health Organization ranks the United States as 37th in the world as far as their health indexes. That means 36 other countries are healthier than the United States. Yet we spend almost 3 times more money than any other country. So it's ineffective and it's expensive and it's not working. And so we've got to radically change what we're doing in this country. And it's nothing to do with insurance. It has everything to do with personal responsibility and making these steps that we're talking about so somebody can improve their health, and at one at a time. And then it goes concentric circles from that. It goes to the individual and the family and the kids, and they're out. But we've got to take steps to do that. Otherwise, we're going to be bankrupt and sicker than anything, and that's the way we're headed.
I'm so glad you said that, Dr. Lynn. Personal responsibility. We bring a lot of really good cutting-edge programming here that a lot of times you don't tend to see in mainstream until a couple of years down the road. And consistently, as we bring these experts such as yourself on the program, I always say this. Look, it's your responsibility on what the next step is. It isn't your doctor's. It's yours. You decide what the next step is. Some of those next steps may require you to read into it a little deeper, to do more research a little more. But don't just stop at the fact that you heard a little bit of information, you went to somebody, you didn't like the results, and then you complain that it's their fault that you didn't get the outcome you were looking for. And I think sometimes we just feel, like especially in the United States, there's a sense that we're entitled to good health, but it's somebody else's responsibility for attaining that.
Boy, yeah.
And I'm just trying to think, how did our thinking ever get in that direction in the first place when you consider, for instance, the way, as you said earlier, people in Europe, you hear about the way they take control and they say, we don't want this nonsense going on, in our countries here. And they seem further ahead when it comes to health care and the way they practice health care, in fact, in Europe by leaps and bounds, and yet supposedly in the United States we're one of the most technologically advanced countries in the world.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. That's what we're seeing in this healthcare insurance shift that we're going through.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody wants a savior. Oh, my insurance is going to save me. It's going to do this and that, and now I've got coverage. What they don't realize, it means nothing.
Mm-hmm.
It won't improve their health, and we're always looking for something. Oh, it's my genes, it runs in my family, and it's always something outside. Not realizing that everything you need to heal is on the inside.
Mm-hmm.
And that's not being promoted. It's not being educated about because, let me take care of you, or let this drug take care of you, or let surgery take care of you, and we offer our bodies onto the table for them to take care of it when in fact we have caused our own problems, and if we want to fix them, then we have to do our own work. And so personally, when people drag another person in for care, that never works because they have to be drug in. But when a person comes in on their own volition, they're needing to make the changes. Then it's a lot easier for them to make the changes. But sometimes, in most cases, it takes a crisis in a person's life for them to do something about it. And it's like, why put up with that? Why do all that when you can do something right now proactively and not spend a lot of time and money and effort on it, but just do the right things? You're going to have a better life. You're going to have less pain, less problems. None of us are immune to accidents or injuries, but you can certainly, the 6 top leading causes of death in America, almost all of them have a great influenced by our lifestyle. They can all be prevented, and we're just shoving that out the window. But we really need to do these things, otherwise we're going to continue having problems.
Now, Dr. Peter Lind, tell us, is there a website people can find out more?
It's called lindwellness.com, LIND wellness.com, and we have. Most of what I have is pictures and videos. I think people are into that too.
Kim Kardashian taking a picture of herself.
We do a lot of video interviews of people, and almost every week we get on a video interview of somebody that we've worked on in healthcare, and I always say, what happened before, what was going on before you came in, and where are you now, and so we do a lot of those. Those are very helpful. But there's a couple of me talking. I do workshops. I do a couple workshops, and I put them on my site. So yeah, it's very informative. I hope people can go to that and read and listen and watch and learn something that they can do to improve their health.
Very good. Well, Dr. Peter Lind, thank you so much for joining us here on the program today.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me.
You betcha. We also encourage you, the listeners out there, visit us at beyond50radio.com. That is the number 50. We do have hot link information for you to find out and explore more about the topics that we bring to you here on the program. Want to thank you again for joining us. This is the Beyond 50 radio program. I'm Daniel Davis, and remember, live your day past halfway.